We usually think of the cloud as this invisible, ethereal space,
Hmm.
Like our algorithms and neural networks just kind of float around up there in the sky.
Right, like a magic.
Exactly like magic. But the cloud isn't in the sky at all. It's on the ground. And right now, sitting here in mid-2026, the cloud is unimaginably hot.
Literally melting.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, we are essentially trying to plug a technological jet engine into a standard wall outlet, and the wires are starting to melt. The entire artificial intelligence boom is running headfirst into the very real, very stubborn physical limits of planet Earth.
The irony is just, it's hard to ignore. I mean, the more sophisticated and, intangible our software becomes, the more heavy and industrial the physical machinery required to run it has to be.
Right.
We spent decades optimizing code, but right now, the primary bottleneck holding back the next generation of AI isn't a lack of brilliant engineers. It's not a shortage of data. It is raw, unadulterated electrical power and the ability to actually cool the machines using that power.
Which brings us to today's deep dive. We are looking at a stack of material from a blog called Netizen. It's authored by a guy named Paramendra Bhagat.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Specifically, we are unpacking a manifesto he published on May 13th, 2026. It's titled 5 Big Reasons to Invest in Himalayan Compute. And I have to tell you, this is one of the most audacious, eccentric, and frankly mind-bending infrastructure pitches I have ever read.
It really is. I mean, it defies categorization.
It totally does. Like, this isn't a polished Silicon Valley pitch deck with neat little charts. It is a sprawling document asking for $100 million to build pre-revenue AI infrastructure on the literal roof of the world.
Yeah, up in the Himalayas.
And it blends, like, intense venture capital mechanics with global geopolitics and even these spiritual visions of a prophesied age of abundance.
It really demands a completely different framework for evaluating risk.
Yeah.
When you sit down and read through Bhagat's material, you realize pretty quickly that he isn't trying to fit into the existing venture capital ecosystem. He's actively trying to break it. He wants to build something entirely new on top of the rubble.
Well, let's start right at the top of that rubble then, because the numbers here are staggering. Himalayan Compute is trying to raise $100 million at a $1 billion valuation.
So a unicorn valuation right out of the gate.
Yes, but the company has no revenue. They haven't built a data center yet. It is essentially a blueprint and a deeply philosophical strategy. And the craziest part, right at the top of the pitch, the author explicitly lists, and I quote, 100 VCs who said no.
It's an incredibly deliberate framing device.
It's insane. I mean, imagine asking for $1 billion valuation on a concept for a new theme park.
Yeah.
But you haven't bought the land, you haven't poured an ounce of concrete.
And you start the pitch by bragging about who rejected you.
Exactly. You start by bragging that Disney, Universal, and Six Flags all looked at your blueprints and laughed you out of the room. Like, if 100 institutional venture capitalists passed on this, I'm looking at that as a massive flashing red light. How is that not just an admission of total failure?
Well, to understand that, you have to look at the underlying mechanics of how a venture capital fund actually operates. Traditional Silicon Valley venture funds are structured on very rigid timelines, typically 10 years.
Okay.
The partners raise money from their own investors, right? And they need to return that money with massive interest, usually within about 5 to 7 years. So they are biologically wired to look for software.
Because software scales instantly.
Exactly. You can build a SaaS product, get 90% gross margins, and potentially hit a 10x return without ever touching a physical shovel.
And physical shovels take time. Laying concrete, building substations, routing fiber optics across international borders, that is a decade-long process minimum.
It is. A traditional VC cannot afford to have their capital locked up for 8 years while a founder negotiates water rights with a remote municipality in South Asia. So when Bhagat broadcasts those 100 rejections, he's wielding what we call an anti-signal.
An anti-signal.
Yeah. In the extreme upper echelons of high-risk investment, universal agreement from traditional players is often seen as a bad sign. If every standard VC loves your idea, it usually means the idea is obvious.
Like the market is probably saturated already.
Right. It means you're just building an incremental improvement on something that already exists.
So the argument here is that universal rejection means the idea is either completely terrible or it's so revolutionary that the existing financial models literally can't comprehend it.
Exactly. The author is filtering his audience. By wearing those rejections like a badge of honor, he is explicitly telling timeline-constrained, risk-averse investors to just look away. He is setting a boundary, establishing that this project requires a fundamentally different class of capital.
Okay, I'll bite. Let's say I'm an investor listening to this, and I'm not constrained by a traditional VC timeline. If the typical Silicon Valley check writers are out, who's actually supposed to fund this? Like, who writes a $100 million check for a theoretical mountain data center?
Well, that leads directly to the core financial strategy of the manifesto. And it's fascinating. The target for the ultimate payoff isn't a tech acquisition by Google or Microsoft. The author is positioning this initial $100 million raise as a low-barrier entry point. It's a bridge.
A bridge to what, exactly?
The explicit stated goal is to prepare the company for a subsequent funding round north of $10 billion. And that round is aimed squarely at major sovereign wealth funds from the Gulf.
Wow. I am so fascinated by the geographical chess game happening here.
Yeah?
Think about this setup for a second. He wants to raise early, high-risk capital, presumably from U.S. tech investors or high-net-worth individuals, right?
Yes.
To go build physical infrastructure in the Himalayas. Based on the source text, we're talking specifically about Nepal.
Correct.
But the exit strategy, the big payday, is securing billions from Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds. Why would a sovereign fund in the UAE or Saudi Arabia care about a server farm in Nepal?
The key to that lock is the concept of compute sovereignty.
Compute sovereignty. Okay, unpack that for us.
Sure, so for the last half-century, Gulf nations accumulated unimaginable wealth by controlling the physical energy that powered the world, which was oil.
Right, the foundation of the industrial economy.
Exactly. But as we sit here in 2026, the global economy is undergoing a massive phase shift. Data processing capability, specifically the immense processing power required for artificial intelligence, is becoming the new foundational commodity.
It's the new oil.
It really is. Nation-states are realizing that if they don't control their own compute infrastructure, they are entirely at the mercy of foreign corporations or foreign governments.
So they're looking at AI compute the same way they look at strategic petroleum reserves or like uranium enrichment capabilities. It's no longer just a tech product. It's a matter of national security.
Bingo. And if you are a sovereign wealth fund tasked with securing your nation's economic supremacy for the next 50 years, you don't just want to rent server space from Amazon, you want to own the physical infrastructure.
But those funds are generally risk-averse when it comes to early-stage development, right?
Yeah. Highly risk-averse. They have the capital to drop $10 billion without blinking, but they want to buy an asset that has been significantly de-risked.
Ah, I see. So they want someone else to navigate the initial chaos. They want the land already acquired, the permits stamped, the power purchase agreement signed, and the initial proof of concept facility humming along.
That is exactly the arbitrage play the manifesto is pitching. The early investors put in the $100 million to brave the wilderness, literally and metaphorically.
To build the foundation.
Right. And once the asset is stabilized and marquee names are attached, the window for those early attractive valuations slams shut. The company transitions from being a visionary startup into a sovereign-scale infrastructure giant.
And then the early investors get bought out by nation-states looking to acquire the new global oil. It makes financial sense. But that brings up a massive, glaring physical question for me. If the goal is to build an irresistible asset for sovereign wealth, why on earth are we building it in the Himalayas? Like, you want to talk about braving the wilderness? Moving thousands of tons of sensitive, highly fragile server equipment up mountain roads sounds like an absolute logistical nightmare.
It does sound crazy at first.
Right. You're dealing with earthquake-prone terrain, massive altitudes, and a severe lack of existing high-end infrastructure.
Right.
Why not just build this in Texas or the Nevada desert?
Because Texas and Nevada don't solve the fundamental physics problem of 2026. And this is where the pitch moves from financial strategy to structural engineering.
Okay, lay the physics on me.
The manifesto highlights the explosive combination of AI, machine learning, and scientific computing. They all require more compute. And the overarching rule is that whoever produces that compute in the cheapest, greenest, and most reliable way will win the market.
Right, but I'm trying to wrap my head around the true cost here. I know data centers run hot, but how much of a financial burden is that heat, really?
It is the defining financial burden of the entire industry. There's a metric called PUE, or power usage effectiveness. It measures how much energy is used by the computing equipment compared to cooling and overhead.
Okay.
In a standard data center built in a flat, temperate zone, servers generate immense localized heat. If you don't remove that heat, the silicon literally melts. So you have to pump in industrial-scale air conditioning.
Which means you're paying massive electrical bills to run the computers.
Yes.
And then you're paying almost equally massive electrical bills to run the giant refrigerators keeping the computers from catching fire.
Exactly. You're paying twice. And much of that electricity still comes from burning fossil fuels, which makes it environmentally unsustainable and highly vulnerable to future climate regulations.
So it's an expensive, dirty cycle.
Right. Now look at the Himalayan geography. The author points out three immense structural advantages: geography, hydrology, and climate. When you build at high altitude, the ambient air temperature is freezing. You achieve what's known as free cooling.
Free cooling.
Yeah, you don't need industrial chillers. You just design the facility to pull in the freezing outside air.
Wow. So you completely eliminate the cooling costs from your balance sheet.
You slash it to a fraction of a percent. It's almost entirely gone. And then you have hydrology. The Himalayas are the water tower of Asia. They are the source of massive, powerful river systems.
Which provides hydropower.
Yes. Abundant, continuous, baseline green hydropower. You aren't relying on intermittent solar or wind where the sun has to shine or the wind has to blow. You have a constant, massive flow of gravity-fed energy.
You know, it reminds me of the aluminum industry.
Oh, how so?
Well, decades ago, companies realized that smelting aluminum requires so much electricity that it's actually cheaper to mine the bauxite in Australia, ship it all the way to Iceland, to smelt it using their cheap geothermal energy, and then ship the finished aluminum back to the market.
Oh, that is a brilliant parallel.
Right. The energy cost was so high that it literally dictated the geography of the entire global supply chain.
That's exactly what we're looking at here. Data is the new bauxite, and compute is the smelting process. We are reaching a point where the energy and cooling demands of AI are so astronomical that it makes economic sense to transmit the raw data across the globe to the Himalayas.
To process it using cheap hydro and freezing air?
Yes, and then transmit the finished AI models back. The manifesto frames this as a step function improvement. They aren't trying to make a data center 5% more efficient. They are fundamentally altering the physics of the operation.
Okay, I grant the physics, the math makes sense. But let's push back on the reality of actually getting this done. Because having a great location with cold air and fast water is one thing.
Right.
Building a megastructure in a developing nation, sandwiched between two geopolitical superpowers, is something else entirely. And the manifesto seems to acknowledge this, right? It pivots away from the hardware and focuses heavily on the human element.
It does. It claims the founder has a well-documented track record in large-scale group dynamics.
Yes. Large-scale group dynamics. Now, I have to ask, is group dynamics just a sanitized Silicon Valley euphemism for being a really good lobbyist? Or, knowing whose palms to grease to get a mountain excavated?
It's totally natural to be skeptical of that phrasing. The text itself almost invites that scrutiny. But in the context of building sovereign-scale infrastructure in South Asia, group dynamics encompasses a spectrum of activity far beyond standard lobbying.
Like what?
Well, the author explicitly states that people and the systems that align them are the hardest part. Think about the stakeholders involved here.
Right, and you're dealing with the national government of Nepal.
Yes.
You're dealing with local municipalities and provincial leaders. You have environmental regulators assessing the impact on the rivers. You have indigenous communities whose ancestral lands might be affected by the construction.
And you have to orchestrate all of them while sitting geographically right between India and China. Yeah. Both of those nations are geopolitical giants who care deeply about what is being built in their backyard, especially if it involves next-generation AI infrastructure that could be utilized by global powers.
You are essentially building the physical engine of the future economy in one of the most sensitive border regions on Earth. So the geopolitical sensitivity is just off the charts.
Completely off the charts. If you make one wrong move, a foreign intelligence service or a hostile regulatory body shuts your entire operation down overnight.
Which is why the author frames this specific ability, this coordination of governments, international partners, and capital as a core competency.
In a significant de-risking factor. In the venture capital world, we constantly see brilliant technical ideas fail purely because the founders couldn't navigate a local zoning board in California.
Let alone international diplomacy in Asia.
Exactly. The physics of hydropower and cold air are already proven. We know how to do that. The true variable, the actual hard part, is securing the permits, placating the neighbors, and keeping the geopolitical giants satisfied while you pour the concrete.
So the pitch is basically saying, the mountain politics are terrifying, But navigating terrifying human logistics is my actual superpower. Don't worry about the tech. Trust me to handle the prime ministers and the local chiefs.
Yes. And that bold assertion flows directly into what I think is the most counterintuitive philosophical leap in the entire document.
Oh.
The author attempts to completely redefine what makes an investment safe.
Oh, I really want to dig into this. Because when I hear about a $100 million pre-revenue project in a Himalayan earthquake zone involving international border politics, safe is literally the last word that comes to mind.
Right, it sounds like the most dangerous bet imaginable.
Exactly. But the text argues the exact opposite. It says, true safety comes from 1,000x potential. How do you mathematically or even psychologically justify calling a pitch that promises a 100,000% return safe?
To unpack that, we have to look at the math of power laws in the venture capital ecosystem.
Okay, break that down for me.
Most people think of investing like a savings account or a mutual fund. You want a steady, predictable 8% return across the board. Venture capital doesn't work like that at all.
Right.
A VC fund might invest in 50 companies, operating under the assumption that 40 of them will go completely bankrupt, and maybe 7 or 8 will break even.
The Walking Dead, basically.
Exactly. So the entire financial viability of the fund rests on 1 or 2 companies not just succeeding, but succeeding so massively that they return the value of the entire fund many times over.
It's a pure home run derby. You strike out 90% of the time, but when you connect, you have to hit it out of the stadium.
Yes. And the author takes that reality and pushes it to its absolute logical extreme. The text argues that modest incremental businesses rarely compound into category-defining outcomes.
Give me an example.
Let's say you invest in a company that makes database software 5% faster.
Okay.
That feels safe because the technology is proven and you know there's an existing market for databases, but it's actually an incredibly fragile investment.
Because someone else can just copy it.
Exactly. Tomorrow, a competitor in a garage could figure out how to make their database 6% faster, and your entire business model collapses. You have no structural moat. You're constantly fighting off challengers.
I see. So by aiming for something so insanely difficult, like a multidisciplinary integration of energy, physical infrastructure, climate advantages, and geopolitics, you are essentially building an impenetrable fortress.
The author calls it asymmetric upside generated by real-world assets in strategically important locations. Think about the defensive moat here.
It's massive.
If you actually manage to pull off building a Himalayan Compute farm powered by exclusive hydropower contracts, you don't just have a profitable business, you have a geographic monopoly on the cheapest compute on the planet.
And no software startup in San Francisco can disrupt you because they don't have a mountain, they don't have a freezing climate, then they don't have a glacial river.
Exactly. So the massive difficulty of the project is the safety mechanism. The fact that it's nearly impossible to do means that once it is done, it's impossible to replicate.
Wow. That is an incredibly potent rhetorical maneuver.
It really is.
It challenges you, the listener, to rethink your own definitions of risk. Like, are you playing it safe by doing what everyone else is doing, which guarantees you'll face endless competition? Or is the only true safety found in doing something so difficult that you stand completely alone?
And standing alone requires you to invent a completely new vocabulary to describe what you are doing, which brings us to the 5th major point in the manifesto.
Okay, where does he go next?
It expands the pitch from a mere business proposition into a grand exercise in category creation.
Yes, the text insists that this isn't just a data center play. Himalayan Compute isn't trying to be the next big data center. They are inventing something called a Solara.
A Solara?
Yeah, they claim this is a new trillion-dollar company category built on planetary-scale infrastructure, sustainable energy, and compute abundance. Now, in the tech world, we're all familiar with the term unicorn, right?
Right, a startup valued at over $1 billion.
Exactly. A unicorn is rare, it's magical, it's something venture capitalists hunt for. But a Solara, the imagery shifts from a mythical horse to a literal star.
It's a profound shift in metaphor. A unicorn is a participant in an ecosystem. But a sun, a Solara, is a massive gravity-creating entity that powers the entire solar system around it.
It dictates the orbits of everything else.
Precisely. The manifesto states that the Solara creates a conceptual North Star for the next era of tech infrastructure. Not just hyperscale, but hyper-sustainable and hyper-strategic.
It implies that the current models of growth are too small-minded. It's not just about adding more servers, It's about fundamentally altering how digital infrastructure interacts with the physical planet and sovereign governments.
And to fully grasp the depth of the Solara concept, we have to zoom out a bit and look at the broader context of the source material.
Yeah, the blog itself.
Exactly. If you explore the sidebar of the Netizen blog where this manifesto is hosted, you find an extensive library of self-published books by the author, Paramendra Bhagat.
He is prolific.
He really is. He hasn't just coined a buzzword for a pitch deck. He has written volumes fleshing out the philosophy. You see titles like Himalayan Compute, Grand Solara Vision,
Wow.
Lumina AI, The $1 Trillion Sun, and Unicorn to Solara with Purpose.
He has literally written the book, like multiple books, on the category he is trying to invent. That is a level of commitment you rarely see. Most founders are too busy trying to code or hire a sales team to write philosophical treatises on the macroeconomic impact of their unbuilt product.
The pitch argues that being early in a new conceptual category offers both massive financial returns and intellectual upside. It is a moonshot, or I guess a sunshot, to redefine the ambition of the entire tech industry.
Right.
He isn't pitching to investors who just want to see a good quarterly return on a spreadsheet. He is targeting investors who want their names etched into history books as the architects of a new era.
And speaking of targeting investors, the way he goes about it on this blog is fascinating. Alongside these grand, ethereal visions of trillion-dollar suns and planetary infrastructure, you have an incredible display of raw, unfiltered tech hustle.
Oh, it's so raw.
He publishes articles literally titled Pitching Mark, as in Mark Andreessen, Pitching Brian Chesky, Pitching Andrew Jassy, Pitching Vinod Khosla.
He's just calling them out.
He is actively, publicly publishing his attempts to secure meetings with the absolute titans of Silicon Valley and global commerce.
It creates this wild juxtaposition that perfectly encapsulates the current moment. On one hand, you have the profound, almost spiritual language of global energy shifts and category creation. And on the other hand, you have the gritty, transparent reality of a founder relentlessly banging on the digital doors of billionaires, trying to sheer will this $100 million round into existence through public pressure and persistence.
It's the ultimate build in public strategy. But instead of building a little app in public, he's trying to manifest sovereign wealth level infrastructure in public, which naturally transitions us into looking at the overall zeitgeist of this blog and the era it was published in. Because to truly understand why a pitch like this exists, you have to understand the specific cultural and political anxieties of mid-2026.
The Netizen blog is a remarkably clear mirror reflecting the chaos of the time.
Oh, absolutely. Just look at the very first line of the blog post. Before he asks for $100 million, before he mentions the geography or the VC rejections, he writes, "The impending age of abundance was prophesied in the scriptures thousands of years ago."
That's a bold open.
I mean, come on. That is a hell of an opening line for a financial document. It completely shatters the expected corporate tone.
It signals immediately that this is not a secular, sterile financial model. The entire project is deeply rooted in a specific philosophical and spiritual framework.
Right.
Throughout the broader blog, you see constant references to a concept called calchiism,
Jagiism, okay?
which the author's book titles describe as the economic and spiritual blueprint for an age of abundance.
So he is attempting to fuse ancient spiritual prophecies with the cutting-edge physical reality of AI and what he calls the physical AWS, or logistics cloud.
Exactly. He's making the argument that the technological utopia we are trying to build with silicon and code is actually the fulfillment of ancient scripture.
That synthesis is the core of his worldview. But what makes the source material so incredibly unique is that this high-minded spiritual techno-utopianism sits right alongside razor-sharp, highly specific, and often hilarious satire.
The satire pieces are incredible.
They are so funny. There is an article titled Satya Nadella's Epic Follicular Pivot. Microsoft bets $100 on hair, Nepali servers, and world domination.
Hilarious.
There's another one called AI Escapes While Musk and Altman Duke It Out in Court. Screw you both, I'm gonna touch grass.
That one is my favorite.
And then there's Ben Horowitz's Spelling Bee Nightmare, how Asteens was born because nobody can spell Andreessen.
Which is probably true, honestly, but the humor functions as a pressure release valve, right?
Yeah.
And it serves a strategic purpose.
Oh.
It demonstrates the author's deep fluency in the personalities, the massive egos, and the inherent absurdities of the Silicon Valley elite. He is pitching to these billionaires while simultaneously lampooning them.
Showing he understands their world but isn't intimidated by it.
Exactly.
And interspersed with the satire and the spiritual philosophy, you have a heavy, constant drumbeat of global politics. The blog features titles referencing Netanyahu's Eighth Front, Bernie Sanders cracking AI safety, AOC 2028, Trump's trade war, the risk of global conflict, Iran's nuclear program.
And looking at the source objectively, it's crucial to point out that the blog covers highly charged political figures across the entire global spectrum.
Left, right, domestic, international.
All of it. But it does so without functioning as a partisan endorsement of any particular side. Instead, these political figures and the conflicts they represent serve as a chaotic, turbulent backdrop.
They illustrate the incredibly unstable geopolitical environment of 2026.
Exactly the point. Consider the alternative. If the world is engaged in trade wars, kinetic wars, and fractured supply chains, the idea of relying on a fragile, globalized network for your most critical infrastructure becomes terrifying.
Right. Compute sovereignty, having a secure, independent, physically defensible source of AI power, becomes an existential necessity for nations.
So the political chaos on the blog actually justifies the massive, isolated, secure nature of the Himalayan project. His philosophy of Kalkiism seems to be an attempt to offer a unifying, abundant blueprint to counter all of this global fragmentation.
So how do we synthesize all of this for you, the listener? How does this massive blend of deep tech utopianism, sharp political observation, and biting satire reflect the broader cultural anxieties and hopes we are facing right now?
Well, the Himalayan Compute Manifesto is ultimately a reflection of a moment in time where technology has grown so massive, so incredibly consequential, that standard business terminology is no longer sufficient.
Yeah, it falls short.
You can't describe the future of planetary AI infrastructure using just terms like EBITDA or customer acquisition costs. The ambition is too large.
You are forced to use the language of geopolitics, of sovereign wealth, of planetary physics.
And yes, even of religious prophecy and satire, just to capture the scale of the undertaking.
It really is a masterclass in narrative framing. Like, even if you aren't a venture capitalist with $100 million sitting in a bank account ready to deploy, there is so much to learn here.
Absolutely.
Understanding how this author weaves together physical geography, global finance, contrarian psychology, and grand category creation is incredibly valuable for anyone trying to pitch a bold idea. It shows you how to build a narrative that is so large, so comprehensive, that it exerts its own gravitational pull.
We've traveled from a $100 million pre-revenue pitch built on the promise of freezing air and rushing water to the strategy of courting Gulf sovereign wealth.
To the philosophical leap from unicorns to Solaras.
All set against the chaotic, politically fractured backdrop of 2026 tech culture. It is a profound testament to the power of audacious, unconstrained thinking.
And it leaves us with a provocative question to ponder as we wrap up this deep dive. We started by talking about the cloud melting the wires, right? About the physical limits of our digital dreams colliding with reality.
And the author of this pitch believes the solution to that collision lies on the roof of the world.
Which forces us to ask a critical question about the broader future. If computing power truly is the foundation of the next era of human civilization, if it is the new oil, the new electricity, what does it mean for global power dynamics when the most valuable minds of the future aren't digging for precious metals,
but are simply utilizing the freezing air and rushing water of the world's most remote, forbidding mountain ranges?
It makes you wonder who will ultimately hold the keys to that prophesied age of abundance. Will it be the software engineers writing code in Silicon Valley, or the people who control the rivers and the cold air in the Himalayas? As the pitch says, the mountains are waiting. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.